My name is Rachel Thompson, and the first time my mother-in-law said my baby wasn't her son's, she did it in front of my entire family. Not privately, not gently. She stood in the middle of my baby shower, looked straight at my stomach, and said the one sentence that made the entire room fall silent. That baby doesn't belong to my son. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard her. People around the room froze. My sister stopped pouring lemonade. My aunt's hand hovered halfway over the gift table. Even the music playing softly in the background suddenly felt too loud. And standing beside me, holding a box of tiny baby clothes, my husband Ethan looked like someone had just knocked the air out of his lungs. His mother Linda didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look uncertain. She looked absolutely convinced. "I'm just saying what everyone is thinking," she added. But the truth was, no one had been thinking that, except her. Up until that moment, my pregnancy had been one of the happiest times of my life. Ethan and I had been trying for 2 years, doctor appointments, negative tests, quiet disappointment every month. Then one morning, 2 pink lines finally appeared on the test. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor staring at them like they might disappear. When I told Ethan, he actually cried. Not dramatic crying, just quiet tears that slipped out before he could stop them. For months after that, everything felt hopeful. We painted the nursery, picked out baby names, argued over whether dinosaurs or forest animals made better wallpaper. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful. But there was always one person who didn't share that excitement. Linda, my mother-in-law. From the moment Ethan told her about the pregnancy, she had been strange, not openly rude, just cold. Polite in that way people are when they don't want to say what they're really thinking. "Congratulations," she had said on the phone, but her voice sounded tight, controlled, almost suspicious. At the time, I assumed she was just adjusting to the idea of becoming a grandmother. Some people take time, but the comments started appearing slowly. Little things at first. "You're showing very early? Are you sure about the due date? Babies usually come 9 months after the wedding, not 7. Each time she said something like that, Ethan brushed it off. "That's just Mom," he told me. "She always overthinks things." I wanted to believe that. Because the alternative was uncomfortable. The alternative was that she believed something else entirely, and unfortunately, that turned out to be the truth. Back at the baby shower, the room remained painfully quiet. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see what I would say, but the truth was, I didn't know what to say. How do you respond when someone accuses you of cheating on your husband while you're holding a gift bag full of baby socks? Ethan finally spoke first. "Mom," he said sharply, "what are you doing?" Linda didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on me. "I'm protecting my son," she replied. My stomach twisted. "From what?" Ethan asked. She gestured toward me. "From raising another man's child." Gasps rippled through the room. My face burned. "Not from guilt, from humiliation." "Linda," I said quietly, "you know that's not true." But she shook her head slowly. "You've been married less than a year," she said, "and suddenly you're 7 months pregnant." Her voice was calm, too calm. "Do the math." The math, that word felt like a slap, because the truth was simple. Ethan and I had gotten married quickly. After years of dating, we decided we didn't need a long engagement. 2 months later, we were married. 3 months after that, I got pregnant. Perfectly normal. But Linda had already decided the timeline meant something else. Ethan stepped between us. "That's enough," he said firmly. "You're embarrassing yourself." Linda crossed her arms. "Then prove me wrong." The room fell silent again. "What?" Ethan asked. "A DNA test," she said. "Simple solution." My chest tightened, because now everyone was staring at me again, waiting, judging, wondering. Even though I had done nothing wrong, accusations have a way of making innocent people feel guilty. Ethan looked furious. "We're not doing that," he said. But Linda didn't move. "If you have nothing to hide," she said calmly, "why would you refuse?" For the first time since the confrontation began, I spoke. "Fine." Ethan turned toward me in shock. "Rachel, it's okay," I said quietly. Then I looked directly at Linda. "You want a DNA test?" She nodded once. "Yes." I folded my arms slowly. "Then we'll do one." The room filled with whispers. Linda smiled faintly, like she had just won an argument, but she had no idea what she had actually started. Because 3 weeks later, when the results arrived, the silence in that room would be even louder than it was that afternoon, and this time, Linda would be the one with nothing to say. The moment I agreed to the DNA test, the room erupted into quiet whispers. Not loud enough to interrupt the party, but loud enough that I could feel the judgment floating through the air. I hated that feeling. Because even when you know the truth, accusations have a way of making people look at you differently. And suddenly, the happiest day of my pregnancy had turned into something else entirely. Ethan looked at me like he couldn't believe what I'd just said. "Rachel," he whispered, pulling me slightly aside, "you don't have to prove anything to her." "I know," I said. "So why did you agree?" I glanced across the room. Linda was already speaking quietly to one of Ethan's cousins, her expression calm, almost satisfied. That look answered the question for me. "Because," I said softly, "this won't stop unless we do." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "My mother is unbelievable." "Your mother," I replied gently, "thinks she's protecting you." He shook his head. "She's accusing my wife of cheating on me in front of 30 people. I didn't disagree, but deep down I knew something else. Linda wasn't going to let this go. Not today, not next week, not even after the baby was born. If we refused the test, she would repeat the accusation for years, at family dinners, at holidays, in whispered conversations behind my back. Eventually, people would start wondering if there was something to it. So I had made a decision. End it now. One test, one answer, and then the truth would speak for itself. The test happened 2 days later. Ethan insisted on coming with me to the clinic, even though he kept repeating the same sentence the entire drive there. "This is ridiculous." I squeezed his hand. "I know." He looked at me with guilt in his eyes. "I'm sorry my mother put you through this." "You didn't," I said. "She did." He nodded slowly, but I could tell it still bothered him. The clinic appointment was quick, simple swabs, paperwork, a technician who had clearly seen this situation 100 times before. "Results usually take about 2 weeks," she explained. 2 weeks, 14 days of waiting, 14 days of knowing exactly what the result would say, while still feeling like my life was being quietly judged. And Linda didn't stay quiet during those 2 weeks. In fact, she got worse. 3 days after the test, Ethan came home from work looking exhausted. "What happened?" I asked. He dropped his bag by the door. "My mother called." That alone explained the expression on his face. "What did she say?" He hesitated, then sighed. "She asked if I'd considered hiring a lawyer." I blinked. "A lawyer? In case the baby isn't mine." For a moment, I couldn't even process the sentence. "She's already planning for that outcome?" I asked slowly. Ethan nodded. "She thinks I should protect my future assets." I laughed once, but it wasn't a happy sound. "I'm pregnant with your child," I said quietly, "and she's talking about assets." Ethan sat down beside me and pulled me into a hug. "I know." His voice was tight. "Believe me, I know." By the second week, the situation had become impossible to ignore. Linda had started telling extended family members about the test. Apparently, she had her own version of the story. According to her, the test wasn't an accusation. It was just a precaution, a way to clear up confusion. The problem was, there had never been any confusion, not until she created it. One evening, my sister called me. "Rachel," she said gently, "Aunt Denise told me something strange." "What?" She said Linda told everyone the baby might not be Ethan's. I closed my eyes. So that's how far it had spread. "She did," I admitted. My sister sounded furious. "I can't believe Ethan hasn't shut that down." "He has," I said, "but Linda doesn't listen." My sister paused. "Are you okay?" I placed a hand on my stomach. The baby kicked gently, a reminder of the life growing inside me. "I will be," I said, because deep down I knew something Linda didn't. The truth was coming, and the truth doesn't whisper. It arrives loudly. 2 weeks later, the call finally came. Ethan answered the phone while I was in the kitchen. I watched his expression carefully as he listened. His eyebrows rose slightly. Then he looked directly at me and smiled. Not a polite smile, not a relieved smile, a proud one. When he hung up, he walked straight toward me. "Well?" I asked. He held up his phone. "Results are ready." My heart beat faster. "All ready?" They emailed them. He opened the message. We both leaned closer to the screen. The sentence was short, clinical, direct. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Ethan laughed softly. "I guess that answers Mom's question." But I wasn't laughing. Because in that moment, I realized something else. Linda hadn't just accused me privately, she had humiliated me publicly, which meant the truth deserved to be seen the same way. I looked at Ethan. "Your mother needs to hear this." He nodded slowly. "Yes, she does." And 3 days later, when we sat across from Linda at her own dining table, the results would leave her completely speechless. 3 days after we received the DNA results, Ethan invited his parents over for dinner. Actually, invited wasn't the right word. He called his mother and said, very calmly, "Mom, we need to talk." Linda immediately agreed. Of course she did, because she thought the conversation would confirm everything she had been saying for weeks, and she wasn't the only one. By that point, the rumor had spread through half the extended family. People had been whispering, speculating, watching me carefully whenever I showed up somewhere, all because one person decided to question my loyalty. So Ethan and I made a decision. If the accusation had been public, the truth would be public too. That evening, I sat at the dining table trying to stay calm while Ethan set plates on the table. My stomach was heavy with pregnancy. The baby had been kicking all day, like they could sense my nerves. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked. "I'm fine," I said. He gave me a look that clearly said he didn't believe me. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said. "Yes, I do." He pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. "I hate that she put you through this." "I know." And after tonight, he added quietly, "She won't do it again." I hoped he was right, but I also knew Linda well enough to understand something. People like her don't admit they're wrong easily. Still, the truth leaves very little room for argument. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:03 p.m. Linda always arrived early. Ethan opened the door while I stayed seated at the table. A moment later, she walked into the room. She was dressed neatly, like always. Perfect hair, perfect posture, but the expression on her face told me everything I needed to know. Confidence. The kind of confidence someone has when they think they're about to be proven right. "Rachel," she said politely. "Linda," I replied. She sat down across from me. Her eyes briefly glanced at my stomach, then back to my face. "So," she said, folding her hands on the table, "did the results come in?" No small talk, no apology, just straight to the point. Ethan sat beside me and placed a printed paper on the table. "Yes," he said. Linda's eyes immediately moved to it, but Ethan placed his hand on the page before she could grab it. "Before you read it," he said, "there's something I want to say." Linda leaned back slightly. "Go ahead." Ethan's voice was calm, but I could hear the tension underneath it. "Mom," he said, "what you did at the baby shower was humiliating." Linda didn't respond. "You accused my wife of cheating on me," he continued, "in front of our entire family." Her expression barely changed. "I asked a question," she replied. "You made an accusation," Ethan corrected, "because I had concerns." I could feel my patience thinning. Weeks of stress, weeks of whispers, weeks of being treated like a suspect in my own marriage. So I spoke. "Linda," I said calmly, "you didn't just ask a question." She looked at me. "You told people my baby might not belong to my husband." She shrugged slightly. "Well, we're about to find out, aren't we?" That sentence told me something important. She still believed she was right, even now, even sitting across from us with the results right in front of her. Ethan slowly slid the paper toward her. "Go ahead," he said. Linda picked it up confidently. Her eyes scanned the page. For the first few seconds, her expression didn't change. Then her eyebrows pulled together. She read the sentence again and again. The silence in the room stretched. Finally, she looked up. "What does this mean?" she asked. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "It means exactly what it says." Linda looked back down at the paper. Her voice was quieter now. "Probability of paternity, 99.99%. She blinked, then looked at me, then at Ethan. "You're the father," she said slowly. "Yes," Ethan replied. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before, because the confidence was gone, and for the first time since this whole situation began, Linda looked unsure. I folded my hands on the table. "So," I said calmly, "now you know." Linda cleared her throat. "Well, I suppose the test confirms it." Confirms it, like it had ever been in doubt. Ethan leaned forward. "You owe Rachel an apology." Linda hesitated, just for a second. But that second said everything. "I may have misjudged the situation," she said. "Misjudged. Not wrong, not sorry, just misjudged." I felt something inside me shift, because after weeks of accusations, that response felt painfully small. "You misjudged my character," I said quietly. Linda didn't answer. "And you told half the family that I cheated on your son." She looked down at the table. "I was trying to protect him." The same excuse, over and over again. Ethan shook his head. "Mom," he said firmly, "you weren't protecting me. You were attacking my wife." Linda finally looked up, and for the first time, she didn't look confident. She looked embarrassed. But what happened next was something none of us expected, because just as the conversation was about to end, Linda asked one final question, and that question would change our entire relationship forever. The room stayed silent after the DNA results. Linda was still holding the paper, staring at it like she hoped the numbers would somehow change, but they didn't. 99.99%. There was no arguing with that, no twisting the meaning, no room for misunderstanding. The baby was Ethan's. It had always been Ethan's, and the accusation that had followed me for weeks had been completely false. Ethan leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "So," he said, "is there anything you want to say?" Linda placed the paper slowly on the table. For the first time since she had walked in, she looked uncomfortable. But instead of apologizing immediately, she asked a question, a strange one. "Rachel," she said carefully. "Yes," I replied. Her eyes studied my face. Then she said the last thing I expected to hear. "Why didn't you get angry?" I blinked. "What?" "When I accused you," she said, "you didn't yell. You didn't storm out. You just agreed to the test." The question caught me off guard, because I had been expecting excuses, or maybe a reluctant apology. But curiosity? That was new. I shrugged slightly, because I knew the truth. Linda tilted her head. Most people would have reacted very differently. "That's probably true." She leaned forward slightly. "So why didn't you?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I answered honestly, "Because arguing wouldn't have changed your mind." Linda didn't interrupt. "You had already decided I was guilty," I continued. "If I had screamed or cried, you would have just used that as proof." Her eyes shifted slightly, which told me I was probably right. "So instead," I said, "I let the truth speak for itself." The room fell quiet again. Ethan looked at me like he had never heard that explanation before. Linda leaned back slowly in her chair, and for a moment, she actually looked thoughtful. Then she sighed. A long, heavy sigh. "I suppose I owe you an apology." Ethan nodded immediately. "Yes, you do." Linda turned toward me. "Rachel," she said, her voice softer now, "I'm sorry." The words sounded genuine, but they also sounded difficult for her to say. "I shouldn't have accused you like that." "You're right," Ethan said. She ignored him and kept looking at me. "I truly believed something wasn't right," she continued, "but the test proves I was wrong." I watched her carefully. People apologize in different ways. Some do it quickly, some do it reluctantly. Linda clearly fell into the second category. Still, an apology was something. "Thank you," I said quietly. Ethan looked relieved, like the tension that had filled the last few weeks was finally starting to dissolve. But I knew something he didn't. An apology doesn't erase humiliation. It doesn't erase the whispers, or the way people had looked at me while they wondered if the accusation might be true. Those things don't disappear overnight. They fade slowly. Linda stood up from the table. "Well," she said, smoothing her blouse, "I'm glad this misunderstanding has been resolved." Misunderstanding? That word again. I almost corrected her, but I decided not to. Sometimes people soften their mistakes with language. It's easier for them to handle that way. Ethan walked her to the door. I stayed seated, rubbing my stomach gently as the baby kicked again. A few minutes later, Ethan came back into the kitchen. "Well," he said, sitting down beside me, "that could have gone worse." I smiled faintly. "That's one way to look at it. You don't sound convinced." I hesitated, then said something I had been thinking for days. "Do you really believe this is over?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said carefully, "your mother didn't just question the pregnancy. She questioned my character, and she told half the family about it." He sighed. "I'll talk to them. It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because," I said quietly, "once people hear something like that, they never fully forget it." Ethan looked frustrated. "So what do you want me to do?" I shook my head. "I don't know." But deep down, I already had an idea. Because while Linda had apologized privately, the accusation had been public, and part of me felt like the truth deserved to be public too. I didn't say that out loud, not yet, but a few days later, Linda herself would unknowingly create the perfect opportunity, and when that moment arrived, everyone who had heard the rumor would finally hear the truth. A week passed after the DNA test. Life slowly started to feel normal again, at least on the surface. Ethan went back to work. I focused on preparing the nursery and attending my prenatal appointments. And for a few days, Linda stayed quiet. No comments, no phone calls questioning the pregnancy, no suspicious looks. But the problem wasn't just Linda anymore. The rumor she started had spread, and rumors don't disappear just because the truth exists. They disappear when the truth is heard by everyone. And that opportunity came sooner than I expected. On Sunday morning, Ethan received a text from his cousin Megan. "Family dinner at Aunt Carol's house tonight. Everyone's coming." Ethan read it aloud while standing in the kitchen. I immediately knew what that meant. Everyone, not just a few relatives. The entire extended family. Uncles, aunts, cousins, people who had almost certainly heard Linda's version of the story. Ethan looked at me carefully. "You don't have to go. I know. If you're uncomfortable, we can skip it." I thought about that for a moment. Skipping it would be easier. No awkward conversations, no curious stares, but it would also mean something else. It would mean letting the rumor live a little longer, and I was tired of that. "I want to go," I said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Okay." Aunt Carol's house was loud when we arrived. Laughter spilled out of the open front door. Kids were running through the yard. The smell of barbecue filled the air. It looked like a normal family gathering, but the moment Ethan and I walked in, I felt it. The looks, quick glances, people pretending not to stare, conversations that paused for half a second before continuing. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. Linda's rumor had clearly traveled far. Ethan squeezed my hand. "Just ignore them," he whispered. "I'm trying." Across the room, Linda was standing near the kitchen counter talking to two of Ethan's aunts. When she saw us, she froze slightly, then forced a small smile. "Hello," she said as we approached. "Hi," Ethan replied. Linda's eyes briefly moved to my stomach again, but this time, she didn't say anything, which felt like progress. Dinner started about 30 minutes later. Everyone gathered around the large table and nearby chairs, nearly 20 people. I sat beside Ethan while conversations bounced across the room. Work, school, vacation plans, normal things. But every now and then, someone's eyes would drift toward me, curious, wondering, trying to read something on my face. Finally, halfway through dinner, Uncle Robert spoke. "So Rachel," he said casually, "when's the baby due again?" The question sounded innocent, but I knew exactly what it meant. He was checking the timeline, the same timeline Linda had questioned. Before I could answer, Linda suddenly cleared her throat, and what she said next surprised everyone. "Actually," she said, looking around the table, "there's something I should address." The room quieted. Every conversation stopped. My heart started beating faster. Ethan looked confused. "Mom?" he said. Linda stood up slowly, and for the first time since this entire situation began, she looked nervous. She folded her hands together. "I owe Rachel an apology," she said. The entire table went silent. People exchanged confused looks. Linda continued, "A few weeks ago, I made an accusation about Rachel's pregnancy. I could feel the tension building. Some relatives leaned forward slightly. Others looked down at their plates. I suggested that the baby might not be Ethan's," Linda admitted. The room filled with murmurs. Even people who had heard the rumor before looked surprised to hear it spoken out loud. Linda glanced briefly at me, then back at the family. "A DNA test was done," she said, "and the results confirmed that Ethan is the father." The murmurs grew louder. Linda took a breath, and I was completely wrong. The room fell quiet again. Because hearing a rumor is one thing, hearing the truth directly from the person who started it is something else entirely. Linda looked at me. "Rachel handled the situation with far more grace than I deserved," she said, "and for that, I'm grateful." Then she sat down. No dramatic speech, no long explanation, just the truth. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Aunt Carol clapped her hands lightly. "Well," she said with a smile, "that settles that." Laughter slowly returned to the room. The tension faded, conversations restarted. But this time, the looks people gave me were different. Not suspicious, not curious, respectful. Ethan leaned toward me and whispered, "Did that just happen?" I smiled slightly. "Yes." And for the first time since the accusation began, I finally felt something lift off my shoulders, because now the truth had reached everyone. But what happened after the baby was born would change Linda even more than that dinner ever could. 3 months after the family dinner, I went into labor at 2:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I stared at the clock while the first contraction hit, trying to convince myself it was probably nothing. Pregnancy books always say that first contractions can feel like mild cramps. Whoever wrote that was lying. Within 10 minutes, I was gripping the edge of the bed while Ethan scrambled around the bedroom half awake. "Is it happening?" he asked. "I think so," I said through clenched teeth. Another contraction hit, stronger this time. "Okay," Ethan said, suddenly wide awake. "Hospital, we're going to the hospital." Watching him panic slightly was oddly comforting. For months we had talked about this moment, packed the hospital bag, practiced the drive route, but when the moment actually arrived, it still felt surreal. By 3 a.m. we were driving through nearly empty streets toward the hospital. Ethan kept glancing over at me every 30 seconds. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Do you need anything?" "I'm breathing." "That's good." Despite the pain, I almost laughed. Labor lasted 12 hours. 12 long, exhausting hours of contractions, nurses, doctors, and Ethan trying very hard not to look terrified. At one point, he whispered, "I think you're the strongest person I know." I replied, "Don't talk to me right now." He wisely stopped talking, but he never left my side, not once. And finally, just after 3 in the afternoon, our baby arrived. A tiny cry filled the room. The nurse gently placed the baby in my arms, and suddenly everything else disappeared. The stress, the accusations, the weeks of whispers and tension, all of it felt small compared to the tiny human staring up at me. Ethan wiped tears from his face. "Rachel," he whispered, "we have a daughter." I looked down at her, her tiny fingers curled around mine, her eyes slowly blinking at the bright hospital lights. "She's perfect," I said softly. And in that moment, she really was. Later that evening, family members started visiting the hospital. My parents came first, then my sister, then a few close relatives. Everyone wanted to see the baby. Everyone wanted to hold her. Everyone smiled. Everyone said the same thing. "She looks just like Ethan." Which made me laugh every time, because it was exactly the kind of thing Linda had doubted. Around 7 p.m., the nurse knocked softly on the door. "There's another visitor," she said. "Should I let them in?" Ethan looked toward the hallway, then back at me. "It's Mom." For a moment, the room felt quiet again. Not tense, just thoughtful. A lot had happened between Linda and me during the pregnancy. The accusation, the DNA test, the apology. But this moment felt different, because this wasn't about arguments anymore. This was about a grandmother meeting her grandchild. I nodded. "Let her come in." Linda walked into the room slowly. She looked more nervous than I had ever seen her. Her eyes immediately moved to the baby in my arms. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring. Then she stepped closer. "May I?" she asked quietly. I gently placed the baby into her arms. Linda held her carefully, like she was afraid to move too quickly. The baby opened her eyes briefly, and Linda's face changed instantly. All the tension, all the suspicion, all the pride, it melted into something softer, something warmer. "She's beautiful," Linda whispered. Ethan smiled. "She is." Linda looked down at the baby again. Then suddenly, she laughed softly. "Well," she said, "there's definitely no question who her father is." Everyone in the room chuckled, because it was true. The baby had Ethan's eyes, Ethan's nose, even Ethan's tiny dimple. Linda shook her head slightly. "I was such a fool," she murmured. Then she looked at me. "Rachel, I'm truly sorry." This time the apology sounded different. Not defensive, not careful, just honest. I nodded. "I know." She handed the baby back to me gently. Then she said something that surprised all of us. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to help." "Help?" Ethan asked. "With the baby," she said. "I want to be a good grandmother." I looked at Ethan. He looked back at me, and we both knew something. People don't change overnight, but sometimes they learn. And maybe that was enough. The next morning, as I held my daughter and watched the sunrise through the hospital window, I thought about everything that had happened. The accusation, the humiliation, the DNA test, the family dinner, and now this moment. Life has a strange way of proving the truth. Sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully, but eventually, the truth always finds its way to the surface. And in my case, it arrived in the form of a tiny baby girl who had her father's eyes.